Good morning.
Good morning.
After a reflection on the conversation we had, the class we had, I think it was 1 week ago, we were talking about the importance of resolving these questions of what is the actual day-to-day action that a non-Jew is meant to do? What is God's vision for each person? And so a story came to mind on this subject because we were talking about how a lot of it's unresolved, and because it's unresolved, it hasn't been, so to speak, tackled fully in some of the questions. Then sometimes a Jewish person, a Jewish rabbi, could be reluctant in a certain sense to be able to delve into it because he's doesn't know the answers, and he's waiting for someone to provide the answers for him. And if he looks up in the standard code of Jewish law, it doesn't provide the answers there. And so a non-Jew comes to him and says, what should I do? Should I do this or do that? I'll give you an example. Should a non-Jew wants to pray, should he come to a synagogue or pray at home or get together with other non-Jews in a different place? So the answer is seemingly obvious, which is that he should obviously come to a synagogue, because a synagogue is meant to be a house of prayer for all the nations. Synagogue is a miniature temple. It's a house of prayer for all the nations. And the Jewish people are building it in order that it should be of service to the entire world. Plus, we see, as we'll get into, one of the laws that apply to a non-Jew, he's not allowed to create his own religion. So he can't create his own buildings with his own services. That would be diverging in a different direction. So I'm telling you that sounds very obvious, but it's not obvious for a person who hasn't asked that question, who hasn't thought about it. He doesn't know what that answer is. So he might say, oh, well, the way he grew up, there's no non-Jews coming to the synagogue. It doesn't fit with his experience, and he's now doesn't know what to do. So he's going to go look up the Code of Jewish Law. And the Code of Jewish Law doesn't say anything on the subject, because the Code of Jewish Law was written to organize it was written for a Jewish audience to organize the laws of day-to-day conduct, and the laws of courts, and the laws of how judgments should be done, and so forth. That was all done with the Jewish audience in mind, so that they could be able to get through their day. So number one is he's going to not know the answer if he's asked. But if you have a vagueness in your mind, you're not really sure what the answer to something is, then you're not going to go put yourself in a situation where you might get asked questions you don't know. So you're going to avoid the situation. You're going to avoid the discussion because you don't want that it's going to be, you're already put on the spot and asked all these questions you don't know the answer to, right? No one likes that experience. So we were talking about Amalek last time, and that its drive is that it wants to bring to an end every living human being, and will bring itself to an end as the last. I'll just tell you that I found a writing in the back of the tractate, the Talmud tractate Chulin, from someone named Maharam Shif, and maybe we'll go through it next week, just as a small detour as we're getting ready for Purim. But he describes that Amalek, Haman, from the book of Esther, which is he's from the nation of Amalek, and he's carrying out Amalek's drive to rebel against God and to destroy the knowledge of God from the world. He's related to the original serpent, the snake that came and convinced Eve that she should eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That snake is what introduced death into the world, death for human beings. And that was Haman's goal, was to destroy everything. Meaning to say, not just the Jews. Like, the Jews were annoying to him, like a piece of sand in his shoe, and he can't stand the Jews. But ultimately, he wanted to destroy every person. So that's number one. But number two is so all this comes together with the following story. I can't remember where I heard this, but in we know that the Nazis and the communists, Nazism is really a version of socialism, a version of communism, that they had a general agenda against the Jewish people, but they had a particular hostility towards Jews that would study the Talmud. And so I heard the following story, that there was the Nazis came into some Nazis officers came into a Jew's home, and that was already a hostile experience. But this Nazi officer saw that on the bookshelves was a set of the Talmud. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen a set of the Talmud, but it's an immediately identifiable, because it's huge. It's huge. This is just one volume of the Talmud, and it's printed in a very, very large set. It's like, I don't know, 3 times this height of a regular book that you would buy on the bookshelf. And it's enormously thick. And when you have 20 volumes of it all together on a bookshelf, it's you go into a person's house, you immediately notice that that the person has a Talmud. It's unmistakable. So this Nazi officer comes in, and he sees they're coming through to check where the Jews are and so forth. And he sees that this Jewish family has this set of the Talmud. So he goes berserk, and they had a word for, in Yiddish, they say Shasid, a Jew that has a copy of this and studies this. I don't know if that's the word he used. The person who told me this story said, or used the word, they had a certain word the Nazis used for the Jews that were not just like the regular Jews, but the Jews that actually had copies of this and studied this. There was a certain word they had for that. And so this Nazi officer saw this, and he went berserk. Like he was screaming, and he had to destroy it on the spot. And he took it off the shelves, and they destroyed this set of the Talmud. So the way the story is typically understood, and I don't have any way of verifying the story, but let's just go with the story for a second, because I think we can learn a lesson from this story. So one is, you could say, listen, the Nazi hates a Jew, and he hates the fact that the Jewish people carry the Talmud, and they carry the Torah, and they carry God's message in the world. That makes 100% sense, because Amalek wants to destroy the knowledge of God from the world, and it would make sense that the Nazis, as being the sort of foot soldiers for Amalek, to carry this out, that's something that would, be something that would be it would drive them to destroy that. But after our discussion last week, the following thought came to me, and you're welcome to make a comment on this if you have any insights. But there's a second piece to all this. On one hand, we see that the Amalek hates the Jewish people because the Jewish people are carrying God's message in the world. They are bringing the knowledge of God into the world, and Amalek wants to fight the knowledge of God. So who they're going to attack first is going to be, on their way to killing everybody, the first they're going to attack are the Jewish people who are carrying this message into the world. But there's a second piece over here, that this Amalek lives a tortured existence. His existence is completely tortured, meaning to say he's a sociopath. He's not connected to himself. He's not calm inside himself. He's not connected to his creator. He's not connected to his soul. He's not connected to his creator. He's not really connected to other people. He's in a constant state of trying to destroy, even though the Nazi officers get together for a beer and look like they're together, but really the level of cruelty in Amalek is always, no one is really ever certain of his position. There's such a drive to prove loyalty to the cause that no one is ever certain. A guy has a slight deviation from the mission, he'll be shot in a second. The same thing by the communists, by the Soviets. That's why they have in every unit, every unit, the second in command is prepared to kill the commander if he, looks like he's not going to carry out orders. So there's no sense of calm. There's no sense of well-being for this person. As tough as he looks, as polished as his uniform is, as polished as his boots are, and he could walk around and he could shoot people, he could kill people. He looks like he's the top of the world in one sense, but in the other sense, he's inside. He is completely as they say in Yiddish, an Eis Mensch. His Menschlichkeit the mensch that he is has been twisted, that he is no longer connected with who he really is. Now, there's two possibilities for Amalek. Amalek can either, how is Amalek? So every person has this connection with God Almighty. He has a divine soul, and he is created in God's image. Every person could be going out in the world, and he could be mistaken. He could be not observing the 7 laws of Noah, and he'll do tshuva. He'll do tshuva. He'll realize his mistake, and he'll do tshuva. He'll repay what he stole, and so forth. And if there's a court of law that's set up, then he will be brought to trial. And if he's liable for a capital crime, then he'll be executed. But this is part of the bringing a man to completion, is he has to take responsibility for his actions, and he has to become, so to speak, freed from the slavery he's created for himself, which is the distance from God. He becomes freed, and now he's going to live a happy, settled, grounded life. So Amalek, however, is an exception. The general commandment in the Torah is that there's an obligation to eradicate, to erase the memory of Amalek from the world, which part of it could be physical, like we see in the story of the book of Esther, that it's required that the Jewish people had to take up weapons to defend themselves, and they killed 75,000 members of Amalek that were following Haman and were prepared to attack the Jewish people. So, however, the general principle is Amalek has to be eliminated. But we see that Haman's grandchildren, many of them did tshuva, and they actually became Jewish. So they were able to make the transition from being dedicated to Amalek and dedicated to destroying God's image. They were actually able to return to who they really are. Going back now to this Nazi officer. This Nazi officer, what's his fury about? He can't articulate this. I'm not saying he would be able to articulate this, but his soul is furious. Why? Because he's stuck in this terrible terror of his own slavery, the slavery to the chaos of his existence, the chaos of an existence that has the divine light is not shining into it. He's in constant conflict with his divine soul. He's Amalek knows there's a God and knows who God is, but fights against God. So he's not really working in a state of ignorance. He's not oblivious to what the truth is. He knows what the truth is, but he's fighting against it. That's what Amalek is doing. Where's his salvation going to come from? It says that if a non-Jew will observe the Sheva Mitzvos of Noach, the 7 laws of Noach, because they were given in the Torah, then he will have salvation. It says he will have a portion in the world to come. Meaning to say his soul will not only have a good existence in this world connected to God, but the soul will continue to live after his physical death. If he's a Hasidic Umas Olam, one of the pious of the nations of the world, his soul is going to continue to exist in the world of the Garden of Eden, with the spiritual world where all the souls go to. He's not going to cease to exist at a death point that he'll just return to dust. The part of him that's the soul will continue. That's an incredible promise, and it's incredible hope, and it's an incredible reality that every human being has this opportunity. However, what I'd like to suggest is that the confusion that the Jew is stuck in the state of the unknown. Okay, so you have, as for what the Jew is supposed to do, the Jew knows he has it. It's all been organized. It's easy. You ask me any question in Jewish law, I can find you an answer in 5 minutes, either because I know it already, I know where to look it up, or I know who to call to get you the answer. But for the non-Jew, there is this so much information and so much in the Talmud and in the Jewish writings, and it's never been brought down to a clear answer. So the Jewish people are walking around in a state of unresolved doubt, which is actually Amalek is the same. The words Amalek, the letters from Amalek is the same numerical equivalent as the word doubt. So on one hand, Amalek doesn't want this information to come into the world. Amalek is happy that the Jewish people haven't got this organized in a simple, straightforward way to come into the world. And every Jew has a pocketbook and he pulls it out and he has all the answers organized for what every non-Jew wants to know. Amalek is happy about that. At the same time, that state of unresolved clarity, that state of non-clarity, keeps Amalek himself in a state of imprisonment. Because only when these questions get resolved and we have them clear, here is what you need to do. There's no doubt. Yes, there's a discussion and a debate among the sages 2,000 years ago about this, but we've resolved it now. We've resolved it. Then here you go, Michael, Iski, everyone. You have here's the simple bottom line. What you need to know. That's a liberating experience. We're going to take you and me. I'll be out of a state of doubt. I'll know exactly what to say. You'll know exactly what to do. There's no greater joy, it says. King Solomon writes, there's no greater joy. Ein simcha katar sasafek. There's no joy as great as resolution of the doubts. It's not necessarily even what it matters what the answer is, but it doesn't even matter on a certain level what the answer is, as long as we get out of the state of the doubt. So here you have this poor Nazi officer. What do I say poor? Tortured soul in his own existence, and he can't get the resolution that would bring him to a state of salvation, to a state of resolution, a state of internal calm, a state of being able to know clearly, because this Jewish guy, this Jewish fellow with his Talmud has got it all still up in here in this unresolved discussion that hasn't been clarified with a clear guidance to the world. So I'm just suggesting that the hatred that the Nazis had towards the Talmud in particular, that they wanted to destroy them, that they burned them, and so forth, was because it's not just the general hatred of the Jews that they wanted to fight against God and they wanted to fight against God's messengers in the world. But in a certain sense, they understood that the lack, on one hand, this Talmud has the answers, but in the frustrating reality is that the Talmud has not been resolved and brought down into a practical reality. So they're hated, they're angry at it because in it lies the answer to their own torture, to their own slavery lies in this book, and they're angry that it's not being resolved for them. So go ahead. I'd like to hear what you have to say about this suggestion.
This sounds like an extra portion of hate towards the Jews because they already had the answer for their conduct of life, but nobody took up the work to resolve this for the rest of the world. So yes, it's kind of this jealousy towards the Jews because they have the answers for their life, but nobody took upon himself the work to resolve all this for the rest of humanity.
That's said beautifully. That's said beautifully, and therefore you can start to understand what's driving that, where the frustration is coming from, and when you just hold on 1 second, please. So this is touches on a very, very important point, which is also exactly on topic over here, is that when we talk about anti-Semitism, so to speak, there's really two sources of hatred of the Jewish people. One is Amalek. Amalek just hates God, so therefore anything that's connected to God, he hates. But the second is the Jewish people The second is that God says, "B'ni b'chari b'nei Yisrael," my son, my firstborn son, the Jewish people. If you call someone the firstborn son, it must mean that there's other sons. It must be there's other children, right? God, we're the firstborn in relation to everyone else. Who's everyone else? Everyone else is our brothers also. They're God's sons, God's children also. So God says to the Jewish people, here's the Torah. This I'm giving to you on behalf of the rest of the world. Your job is to bring that to the rest of the world. Now, if we take a similar analogy, a metaphor, you have a father who has a bunch of sons, and he says to his sons, he says to the oldest son, here's the inheritance. Your job is that I'm giving you the inheritance. Your job is to share with the other brothers and make sure they all have what they need. So afterwards, the father, is not there, and the son's supposed to carry out his mission. He says, listen, I'm so important. I'm the firstborn son. I have the inheritance. The other sons come and say, where do we get our portion? What do you mean? I'm the firstborn son. I'm the one who has it. What are they going to do? They're going to hate him. They're going to hate him that he's not sharing the message. He's not sharing the inheritance with them. He's not distributing what he's supposed to be distributing. He was given it. His firstborn sonness is represented by the fact that he has this special mission. So therefore, then a person sees the Jew is not carrying out his mission. He is the chosen. He is the firstborn. No one's arguing on that, but then he's not carrying that out to be able to bring that message to the world. So this is something an insight that came to me many, many decades ago, 20 years ago. It became clear. So now the solution is if you just distribute the wealth of the inheritance, then that just resolves everything except the Amalek. And now so Amalek would still have his hatred. He'd be, trying to get, and Amalek uses this discontent among the other brothers to rile up the other brothers against the Jews, because Amalek doesn't have enough people, doesn't have enough strength to be able to carry out its goal unless it can get other human beings that are not Amalek riled up also. So therefore it foments this hatred, and it foments the actions against the Jewish people on behalf of Amalek. But as soon as you bring this message to them and you bring the clarity to them, it resolves all that. And so now we're bringing it to a new level in this discussion here. Even Amalek himself is angry and frustrated that it's not being brought out with clarity, because he himself would be redeemed. So I just wanted to add that to what you're saying so beautifully. And it puts additional emphasis on what we're doing here, because this is what Rabbi Steif was doing. Rabbi Steif was doing, and we have a job over here now, which is to bring it to the final, his final intention in two regards. One is that we have to see that there's sometimes he says, well, it says over here like this, and it says over here like this. Now, generally speaking, he brings it to a resolution. So there's clarity. But our job is to insist on that clarity. We have to demand from him the answer. And to the extent he doesn't provide the answer, we have to demand that God should guide us to find the answer and bring it to a level of clarity. Because a person, even a person who's learning the Hebrew, the Jewish person, could still be caught in there's this opinion and this opinion. It's true that Rabbi Steif says like this, but there's like that, you see? And a person could still get caught in the lack of clarity. So our job is in studying this together, our job is to demand, and I'm putting it on you also to demand from me, not to let me off the hook. Our job is to say, okay, we're going to bring this whole cycle here that we've just described and all the terrible consequences for everybody involved, which is all of us. We're going to bring this down to a resolution. Whatever we see, and we have to go through the entire Sefer, the entire book first, because he discusses things in different stages, meaning to say, brings up a question, it's unresolved. Later on, he brings it up again and discusses it from a different angle and comes to an answer. So we're not going to rush to get to solve everything. We have to get through the entire book. But that number one is our job is, and I started to write notes over here, our job is to say, okay, here is the bottom line. This is the way we are going to go on this. That's number one. Number two is to bring it into other languages. Because even if we bring it to resolution, we could use that to, that's a beautiful thing. And learning Torah and clarifying Torah in itself brings redemption to the world. Even if we, just from the fact that we do it and we study it, but and we bring that clarification. But now we have to go the other extra step, and hopefully we could take this and get into English, into German and so forth, so that it gets to where Rabbi Steif wanted it, that it's now accessible to every person with the clarity, and we will bring redemption to everybody, including the current Nazi officers, meaning to say, they as we've discussed before, they didn't, there were the individuals, some of it met different circumstances, but the ideology of Amalek didn't go anywhere, and continues full force now. So we want to provide this to the world, that we can immediately reach a state of redemption for everybody. Any comments or questions before we continue? Okay. So here we are. So we're going to continue over here. I want to share with you what it says in the Gemara in here. It says at the beginning of page Reish Tzadik Vav, it says 296. It says Hin v'chulin Tzadik Beis. We said that in the Talmud in Chulin, in the tractate of Chulin, on page 92, and there's one dot here, which means it's on side A of the two sides, A and B. So on side A, it says that there's 30 mitzvahs, there's 30 commandments for the non-Jews. So I wanted to actually see, I didn't find, maybe we'll bring it up next time, but I want to spend time now, but I wanted to show you in the actual original. It says, Ula Omar. Ula was one of the Talmudic sages. Ula says, Eilu shloshim mitzvahs. There's 30 commandments that the non-Jews, the sons of Noach, took upon themselves. The Ein Mekayimim. So that's number one. That's all it says about the 30 mitzvahs. It just says there are 30. There's a discussion about the word 30 in a particular context, and they're asking, what does it mean? What is this 30 referring to? So Ula says it refers to the 30 mitzvahs that the non-Jews, the Bnei Noach, accepted upon themselves. This list that we're doing on this page right here is an explanation of what those 30 are. But the Talmud itself doesn't say what the 30 are. But then Ula continues and he says, "Ve'ein mekayimim ela shlosha." But the sons of Noah, they're not fulfilling them in the world. In practicality, they're not actually keeping these 30, except for 3. Achas, she'ein kaisim ksuva l'skarim. One is that they don't write a marriage contract for men, meaning to say that, we're going to see what Rashi has to say in a second. They don't have not marriage between men and men. That's what Ula is saying. They're saying even though the non-Jews are not keeping the 30 commandments that they are commanded, or they've accepted upon themselves, nevertheless, there's 3 that they do keep. One is that they do not do marriage between men and men. That's number 1. Another one is that they do not sell, they do not do business with the meat of humans, the flesh of humans, right? They don't sell them in the store. Meaning to say, he's not saying that they're not people who are not cannibals, but they're not creating it as a business. And the third one is that they honor the Torah. We're going to see from these over here that there is a concept of honoring the Torah. So it shows us that now we're 2,000 years later, and how far the world has spiraled down, even compared to then. Because now they go ahead and they say there's marriage contracts. They're going around campaigning around the world that there should be marriage contracts for men marrying men. So what does Rashi say? Rashi is the preeminent commentator on the Talmud, giving us the basic explanation. He says the Afal P on this thing about not writing marriage contracts. He says the Afal P. This is now on the top of page 2 of the Gemara, of the second side B. The Afal P shechshudim l'mishkav zachar u'miyachdim lehem zachar lehishtashmishim. Even though the non-Jews are suspected in sexual relations between two men, and they set aside a man for this purpose, they still are not conducting themselves in such a kalas reish, means like lightheadedness, that in this mitzvah, in this command, kol kach, to such an extent, sheyichtavu lahem ksuba, that they would write for the man a marriage contract. Okay, so now Rashi is saying that this is it's bad enough that they would get so misguided from their procreative energy that they would get involved in relationships between two men, but even still, they did not go to such a descent of their total lightheadedness, their total frivolity, that they would go ahead and write a contract. So now we see what's happening in the world is that now they're getting it. The push is that actually their campaign is to say that the greatest thing you could do is to write a contract. They're saying that shows how much your equality. They use the word equality, but we see over here that it can't have equality. Meaning to say, this is not something that even a normal non-Jew would even consider, even if he's engaged in the conduct inappropriately and against God's command. But it would never occur to him to enshrine it into a contract as a public declaration of what he's doing. Okay, so I wanted to bring that to your attention. We see the Talmud is discussing it, but it says over here on the side, he brings from the same places on the side of where it says there's 30 commandments. There's a notation on the side that says, look in the place that the book that Rabbi Steif is quoting from over here. Okay, so to pick up where we left off, we started last week on this, and I'm going to just start from the beginning. So we have here 7 categories, and so this is going to now list us 30. Aleph, the first is avodah zarah, tefelos niflois alea, nitfalos alea. There's serving idols, and all the details that are related to this. Ma'aviv ve'esh, we said there was passing the children through fire, which is the avodah zarah of Melech. There's in the Torah talks about a certain avodah zarah, certain idolatry, where the children were passed through fire. Kesam, we said there was all these different divinations. Kesam, unan, menachesh, machashef, chiver, chaver, oiv, yidoni, derishes, elamesim, as seeking counsel from the dead. So these are all different things with using dead bodies and speaking to the dead and all kinds of different magical ideas. All are forbidden. Hare elo eser mitzvahs. That's 10 commandments right there. Shenis, the second category, gili arayas nitfalos elea, the sexual immorality and everything that's related to that. That's number 1. Number 2 is poru achas. This is the obligation to be fruitful. The 13th is rabu, to be multiplying. Steim the mitzvos ase. So these are 2 positive commands. One is to be fruitful and one is to multiply. So in parentheses is a parenthetical comment where he says, and you need to look now in the Talmud in Sanhedrin, in the Tractate of Sanhedrin on page 59, second side, 59b. There it explains that Puruvu, the mitzvah of being fruitful and multiplying, was not said to the children of Noach. Kain who divrei Rashi b'Yevamis, but Rashi in his commentary in the tractate Yevamis does say that they have an obligation in being fruitful and multiplying. Ayin Taisus Chagiga, see the commentary of the grandchildren, some of the people, including some of the grandchildren of Rashi in Masechta Talmud Chagiga. And we're going to explain it, God willing, in the continuation of the this compilation of this book. Now, here's an example, a perfect example of what we're talking about, where there's different opinions in different tractates, and it can leave a person in a state of disarray, of confusion. Rabbi Steif is saying, he's bringing from the author that he's quoting from over here in this list of 30 that says there is an obligation, but then he's bringing out there's a point where it says there isn't an obligation. Now, what we're going to see, I'll just give you a little glimpse into this. The real question, there's no question that a non-Jew has an obligation to have children and fill the world with children. That's not a question. The question that really the sages are asking is it a separate commandment after the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai? Is there a separate commandment to the non-Jew to have children, to be fruitful and multiply? Or is it something that is now included in the 7 commandments? And we're going to see how it is. So, and I'll explain in a second how it's included in the 7 commandments. So everyone agrees that God said to Adam and God said to Noah, be fruitful and multiply. There's no discussion, there's no debate on that. When there's a debate now, does it apply to the non-Jews? It's not a question of whether they should be fruitful and multiplying. It's a question is it a standalone commandment? Or was that commandment subsumed into the 7 general commandments? How would it be subsumed into the 7 general commandments? So Rabbi Steif writes in a different sefer, and my hope is to bring together, collect one of my goals is to bring all this together into writing. But if you read what he says in another book, basically the way it comes out is as follows, that the commandment not to have, so how does a non-Jew violate, if he doesn't have children, how does it fit into the 7 laws of Noah? Number one is it violates the command to not worship idols. Because the act of having children is the act of belief in God Almighty. It's a act of faith that God Almighty could take care of these children. And you could bring them into the world with the assurance, because when you bring a child into the world, it doesn't matter how much money you have. There's no way to know, you can't possibly provide for this child for the rest of that child's life. You don't know what's going to be. Even if you have $100 million in the bank account, the bank could go to business tomorrow. When you're bringing a child into the world, you don't know what you're going to be able to provide for that child. You're trusting that God is going to be able to provide. So not having children is a sign of lack of faith. It's a sign of the belief in the cult of scarcity. And we see that today. People are limiting the number of children they have because they don't think there's enough money to pay. They decide that college is the most important thing, and college is expensive. So therefore, they can't afford it. So they say they can only, they do mathematical calculations and say, okay, they can only have the 3 children, 2 children, whatever, that's all they could afford based on their salary. That is idolatry, because therefore a person is putting ahead of God's abundance. They're putting ahead the human calculations and putting other factors ahead of God. So that's number one. Yes, go ahead.
So every time I put logic instead of emunah, it's a direct transgression against idolatry.
Yes. Now, when
short.
you do the direct, so now the one thing that people can get confused on is they can say, well, 1 second, what is does it rise to a capital crime? It may not rise to a capital crime in the sense that if a person was to go out and to bow down to an idol and say, this piece of stone is their God, that could be a capital crime. If a person does not have children or limits the number of children because of the calculations, it's still idolatry. He's creating a different hierarchy in the world where God is not the primary. It may not be a capital crime. So that's just an important point to remember. That's why this is part of the confusion, so to speak, that we have to bring clarity to. when you see Jewish writings on the 7 laws of Noah, they'll try to, many of them will say it's very, very limited. It's just these 7 things because they're thinking that it's limited to what are the 7 points of capital crime. But included in those 7 is many, many, many different details that are also forbidden, even if they're not punishable with a capital punishment. Go ahead.
If I understand it clearly, so what our task is now to get into every detail of those 7 commandments, and also finding out the hierarchy. When is it a capital crime? When is it something less and less and less? To see what kind of transgressions are going generally against, for example, idolatry, but to level it up, and this is what Rabbi Steif did, if I understood correctly.
Right, and there's 2 practical points to this over here we have to keep in mind. Number 1 is that we need to know, and you need to know, and your wife needs to know, and everyone needs to know what's the right thing to do, what's right and what's wrong. That we have to be clear on. But there's the second point over here. The 7 commandments, there's a commandment to set up courts of justice, which we're going to see actually is listed in the Talmud in Sanhedrin as the first of the mitzvahs, not the 7th. It's listed as the first, which is very important to understand, because we're going to see that it's contained in the command to have courts of justice is the command to disseminate, to proclaim and promulgate these commandments. You have to, part of the commandment to bring justice into the world is to teach people what the right thing is. So that's why it's listed as first. And we're going to see how we're going to see shortly. I'm not going to get to it today, but we'll see how Rabbi Steif brings that in. So what that means is not only do we have to know what the right thing to do and teach is, but we also have to, you're going to be a judge. Everyone on this call is there's going to be setting up courts of justice. Who's going to be qualified to sit in the courts of justice? The people that learned in the philosophy of the universities and the Enlightenment. Their minds are so twisted they can't figure out the difference between right and wrong. So you're going to be a judge. You know, I'm learning. There's a fellow that comes to. I suddenly realized this because we have this. Sometimes we have these general concepts. We know that there's going to be courts, and we all think to ourselves, oh, there's going to be courts. There has to be courts. Non-Jews have to set up courts of justice, but we don't see that practical connection. I was learning. There's a 20-year-old that comes and learns with me in person. And he says to me, Rabbi, I want to learn the Talmud. So I say, okay, we'll learn the parts of the Talmud that are related to the non-Jews, to the B'nai Noach. So I'm sitting here and I'm explaining to him the different, we're learning in Sanhedrin, with Talmud Sanhedrin, we're learning the different types, what constitutes cursing God's name, God forbid, what constitutes this, and when is it, how many witnesses, and when is it a capital crime for a Jew, when is it a capital crime for non-Jew? And I'm telling him all this, and I'm like, suddenly it hit me. 1 second, I am training a judge. It's not just merely that he needs to know, stay away from these things. These are not proper things to do. But he has to know the details of the entire Talmudic discussion to be able to sit on a court, listen to testimony where someone is accused of one of these crimes against God. And then he has to be able to make a judgment as to whether the person is guilty or innocent. And if he's guilty, what is the punishment? So it's incredible when you think about that. But I think that's something people haven't realized. Everyone's teaching the Sheva Mitzvahs as like, okay, it's a personal recipe book, so to speak, which is very important. But we're forgetting that we're also supposed to be training judges, so you know exactly how to be a judge.
It's just an annotation. It's quite fun that everybody sitting here together with you is part of the dojo. And 7 of the arts we are training are actually samurai styles, and the samurai was also judge and executive officer. It's very 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 funny, just as an annotation.
Very interesting. So number 1 violation, not having children or limiting the number of children is a violation of the command against the command against not worshiping idols. Number two is it's a violation of the command against murder. If we look in the book of Genesis in chapter 9, it's brought over there why God says that to be fruitful and multiply twice, and sandwiched in between the two statements about being fruitful and multiplying is the command against murder and against suicide. And it's explained that it's because someone who does not involved in having children is a murderer. Because why? How can we say such a thing? Because what is murder? Murder is erasing the divine image from the world. The reason we don't murder is not because we're afraid someone else is going to kill us back. The reason that's a enlightenment concept of the social compact. The reason we don't murder is because God created every person in the divine image, and I don't have permission to erase the divine image from the world. Not having children is exactly the same crime. It's refusing to bring the divine image into the world. God wants the divine image brought into the world in unlimited quantities. Either erasing one that already exists or refusing to bring them into the world is a violation of the commandment of the Sheva Mitzvos of the commandment of murder. Number three is theft. You're gonna say, how is this theft? Because Rabbi Steif writes that denying a man the pleasure of being together with his wife is an act of theft. So therefore, according to so we could see that the commandment to be fruitful and multiply does apply to the non-Jews. It's just that it's included within, according to the opinion that it's not a standalone commandment. It's not that the commandment was removed from the non-Jews, from the Bnei Noach. It's the commandment is still in force and effect for the non-Jews. But if you have the viewpoint that everything that applies to the non-Jews is included within the seven basic categories of laws, then it's included within the 7 laws as part of 3: not worshiping idols, not murdering, and not stealing. So that is just to highlight over here what he's saying about the mitzvah, the commandment to be fruitful and to be commandment to multiply. It's also interesting you write about calculations. Calculations is an opponent of love. Love comes with a desire to spread and desire to be loving. Having children is a product of love. When a person starts making calculations, it's a love between the husband and wife, and it's a love for the child to bring the child into the world. When a person starts making calculations, they're actually deciding to create boundaries and limitations on love. It's interesting. I was in my son's bar mitzvah, which was in January. So I went into the kitchen, and there was a kitchen staff of people that have been hired, waiters and people to help get the food out. So I went in, I banged on the table there in the kitchen, and I said, I'd like to speak to you. I said that there's nothing to be afraid. God loves each one of you. You're created in God's image, and you don't have to don't make any calculations. You just do what God wants, and nothing to be afraid of, particularly in light of, because I told all these people that came in, I said, we don't want you wearing masks here, no masks, because all the staff comes in, even they feel they have to wear masks, and I say, no, we don't want you to wear masks here. And so what happens is, anyway, so I give these words, and I had a friend there, a rabbi who speaks Spanish. He translated into Spanish for them, and their faces were just glowing. It was incredible. So one of the fellows there, so I found out afterwards, one of the fellows there, who was like the manager of the group, or the team leader. So his wife was also working there. So apparently he said to the Spanish-speaking rabbi, he says, in 9 months, there's going to be babies from the rabbi's speech. I was like, what do you mean? He said, because The rabbi said, no calculations. We're going to go have more children. So you see that the natural state of a human being is to have, that love is something that flows naturally. It's only, and see, by all living things, what is the first thing that we're starting to now come to the spring, the chicken, the birds, they're finding a mate, and then they're going to build a nest, and that's their whole life. Their whole summer is building a nest to bring love into the world, and they're going to bring new life into the world, and they're going to feed them, and they're going to grow until they become themselves big enough to go and find a mate and now bring more into the world. That is no question by them. By a human being, it starts figuring, hold on a second here. How many pieces of seed are there? How many nests could we fit into one tree? And what's going to be in the winter is going to come, and what's going to be with this, and maybe they're going to cut down this tree, and then we're going to have we're going to have fewer trees. The birds don't figure that out. They don't think about that. So, and when the tree, if you look at trees and any tree, it's incredible. Produce thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of seeds. Maple trees, pine trees, you look on the ground around, there's seeds. That's because the whole purpose of life is to bring more life into the world. So that's really the first fundamental law of biology, is life is for the purpose of life. Life is bring more life into the world. That's really the defining nature of life. And as a matter of fact, you could suggest the disease, let's say, we don't call it by the name, that disease, cancer. Really, what do we say the problem in cancer is? The problem in cancer is that some cells insist on keeping to grow. So you could say, oh, the problem is these cells, the tumor cells are the problem because they're not obeying the agreement with the other cells on how much we're supposed, the rules on how much they're supposed to grow. Let's look at it the other way. 1 second. It's not the tumor cells are sick. The rest of the body is sick. The rest of the body is lethargic. It's not growing properly. And these cancer cells are like, what's wrong with you guys? We're going to continue to grow. We're not going to be depressed and slowed down over here and so forth. And if you realize that, you realize understand that's the first law of biology, then now that it's not about attacking them, it's about increasing the life energy in the rest of the body so that the cancer cells could feel confident they're living in a successful, productive living system. We see this also in one of the things we could learn in Tanya is that everything that we need to know about biology, we could see in human interactions, in communal interactions. A community is a large-scale organism, and we see that if you have a normal, let's say a congregation, a community, a congregation, everyone gets along, everyone respects each other's boundaries, everyone makes sure to make space for everybody else. All of a sudden, you have a couple guys sitting in the back of the synagogue. They're like talking, and they seem agitated, and they're trying to seem to doing their own thing. They're not fitting in with everyone else. So you could say to yourself, 1 second, these guys, there's something wrong with them. We got to kick them out. Or we say, no, something wrong with the rest of the congregation. The rest of the congregation is like so lethargic. They're lacking energy. And these people have energy. So they make noise. They're trying to, get things happening. And instead of attacking them and saying, you guys are out of line, we should be saying, what's wrong with the rest of the congregation? We're all sitting there very nicely and doing only what we're supposed to do, but maybe we've taken it too far and there's a lack of life energy in the congregation or in the community. So this is what we have to remember about the power of life. And it says in Deuteronomy and Devarim in the Torah, the Ibn Ezra writes on the verse that says, and you shall choose life, that life is for love. That's the purpose of life. So that it's all connected together. I mean, it's life is for the purpose of increasing life. How is life increased? It's through love. That's what is the driving force, the driving expression of life is love. So now we can understand when a person comes in along and says, okay, we're going to cool off that love by bringing into it calculations Anytime you bring in intellect is by nature is cool. It's cold. 2 + 2 = 4. There's nothing exciting about that. It's 2 + 2 = 4. Now, if we could start saying, well, we're going to take the love, the passion, the life force, and we're going to first make it live according to the rules of mathematics. So we decide that there's supposed to be a certain number of children. We got to cost so much per child. This is how much we make. Therefore, we're going to bring in the calculations and say, okay, we're going to put a restraint on the love, on the passion. We're going to put a restraint on the life force in order to be able to fit the calculations. What are we doing? We're fighting against our own life force. And this is idolatry, because we are creating new higher rules above the only rule that exists, which is the force of life and the force of love, the power of that, the power of life and the power of love. That's why, my friends, the very first commandment is the commandment, and the very first commandment of the Torah is to be fruitful and multiply. For 2 reasons. One is because that's the whole purpose. That is the fundamental commandment of the Torah. And then why is it necessary to give us a commandment? It's true, God gave the animals command to be fruitful and multiply, and the fish and so forth, and the trees. But why does he need to give it to us? Because he knows that we will use our thinking to come up with calculations. And the people's calculations also come up with things like, oh, it's going to be too much on the woman's body. It's going to affect how she looks. It's going to affect this. It's going to be there's not enough love to go around for if you have many kids. How is each child going to get enough time? All these are lies of calculations that ignore the reality that God Almighty is providing the life and providing the love. Because just as an example, from a medical perspective, a rabbi spoke to Rabbi Ozdaban Kraitz. He said he spoke to a doctor and said that a woman's cycle takes more toll on her body than a pregnancy. That a pregnancy, so it's known in the doctors will talk about a woman who's had a lot of children looks younger than a woman who has no children or has very few children. Why? Because the process of bringing new life into the world keeps the body and keeps the soul in the body young. So it's a lie when they say, oh, it's going to be too much in the body. It's going to age the body. No, they're literally lying. On the contrary, it keeps the body young. Here's another thing. You're going to say, what about the number of children? If you have 20 children or 10 children or 15 children, you would think that if you have one child, you're going to give them more love. So one child, you have what? It's 2 parents giving 100% love. If you have 10 children, each one only gets 1/10 of the love. So what that calculation fails to recognize, where the falsehood comes in over here, is that number one is when you bring more children into the world, they have the love from each other. That's many, many times over. Now you have, if you're instead of being one child with 2 people that love you, if you're one of 10 children, you have 11 people that love you. And that love is greater in a certain sense than the love of the parents, because the parents are going to pass away at a certain point in time, but the siblings will continue to love their siblings until they're all their lives. So that love is even greater. And love is something that is able to continue to grow and grow. So the capacity of the heart of a parent with 1 child is only so big. If when Michael, you just had a child, you feel your heart is like the biggest heart in the world right now. But when you have 10 children, you're going to realize what you can't understand right now is that your heart can be more than 10 times as big as it is right now. What you feel right now is just it for you. From going from 0 children to 1 children, it's like a whole new world of love. But to go from 1 to 10, it's more than 10 times more. So the children are actually receiving even more love. They may have less time from each parent because now there's 10 kids to take care of, but there's actually an increase in love. Why? Because it's coming from the infinite creator. It's not limited by the calculations. So when we try to bring calculations in from our thinking and put God out of the picture and say, well, God said this, yes, be fruitful and multiply, but what God doesn't understand is that it's cost money for tuition, and there's going to be 10 children, and there's going to be the wife is going to be tired, all these kind of things. Then that's why we're saying it's fits in under the idolatry because we've taken human logic with its total lack of proper input. The human logic has very, very limited and really not only limited, but false inputs. And therefore the output is false. And then we say, oh, that, since I thought of it, since it's human reason, therefore that's going to come ahead what the Torah says, comes ahead what God says. So therefore, what we need to do is we need to put aside all calculations. And that's what comes back to you were saying, Marco, Amuna. The Amuna is, I can't explain it to you, but all I know is I'm from a pure place and God is bringing purity and love and life into the world. And my job is to increase life. My job is to increase love. That's it is. It says the whole Torah, Rabbi Akiva, we're going to learn later, Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Ben Azai, they were talking, what's the fundamental principle of the Torah? The fundamental principle of the Torah, Rabbi Akiva says, is to love your fellow as yourself. As much as we're talking about all these logical ideas and the establishment of civilization, and these are all important concepts, but we cannot become here in this discussion a bunch of like intellectuals. Our job is to be full of love. We're doing this out of love. We are teaching others out of love. We are bringing others up to a level where they can now stand on their own 2 feet and see that God created them in God's image and know that they can have a happy, beautiful life in this world and the next. That's love. When we are building a family, that's love. When we're helping another person, that's love. When we're making sure that they have food on their table, that's love. That's what Rabbi Akiva is saying. To love your fellow as yourself is the fundamental principle of the Torah. So, God willing, we should take that to heart and remember that it's about a feeling here. It's about a feeling, being connected to the feeling of what it really means to be alive. Just to finish over this section, do you have do we have 10 more minutes, or does everyone want to stop? Everyone okay? I just want to, we got only to this point last week. We got into an important discussion, and now we got to the same point. We got to another important discussion. So I think we'll just try to push through to the end of this page, if that's okay with everybody. So number 14, the forbidden to be a man to have relations with a man, even if he were to make a marriage contract. 15, kalaya behema, which is the mixture of 2 animals, are not allowed to be mixed together, both in mating and in working together. You can't have 2 unequal animals. You can't put a donkey and an ox, a bull together to do plowing. The sirus, that means you're not allowed to render infertile, to castrate, like they do by the animals that they make, that the animals cannot reproduce. It's a terrible, terrible thing. And also that we see that how we treat the animals is later on comes to human beings. So we see 2 things. One is that people put down their dogs. They kill their dogs. And then they come and the same human logic comes now to put down human beings. They neuter and spay animals in every city. There's rules. You cannot, in some places it's mandatory to immediately render infertile, that they cannot reproduce the animals, and that's what they're doing to human beings. Human beings, they're pushing from every angle that they should not have children. So we have to see that we cannot do anything in the world that's going to prevent the reproduction of any living thing. Barakavas Elon, and the mixture of trees. That means we cannot go and take a tree from, harkavas, mixing together tree species. So you cut they do it's almost all trees are done like this today, unfortunately. But they take the trunk of a tree and they put it on the stalk of another tree, mix the trunks together. Okay, that's not allowed. Hari Sheva. This is 7 im Gili Arais. This is 7 that are included within the forbidden mixtures. You see, it's interesting that the mixture of the tree is included within the immorality of sexual immorality. So you're not allowed to have any forbidden mixtures, whether it's between human beings, forbidden mixtures. And it's interesting that a woman and a man the woman is only allowed to be married to one man, because there can't be any mixtures. There can't be any mixtures that she's with one man and she was with another man, and there's a confusion of the seed, whose this child is. It has to be a clarity. You can't mix things together, and there's the obligation to have children, and the no mixtures even among animals and among plants. The third general category, 18, shvichos domim, murder, which we said includes suicide, and 19, v'seiter loyei shel Yisrael tefela aleh, and slapping the face of a Jew, hitting a Jew, is included in this, and that is 2 commandments. Revius, the fourth general category, Birkas Hashem, which is a euphemism for cursing God's name. It literally means blessing God, but it's a euphemism. We don't want to say the actual thing. 21, Kovod HaTorah Tefela Aleh, and honoring the Torah is related to that. To curse God's name is a desecration of God, and honoring the Torah is an honoring of God. So it's related in this general fourth category over here. And also to labor in the Torah that was given to them. Because a non-Jew, for a son of Noach that works in the Torah, when I say work over here, meaning to say it's asik, meaning to say it's not just studying, but actual engaging in and working in the Torah, is like the Kohen Gadol. He's like the high priest. And meaning to say, see Sanhedrin, Nun Tes, second side, that is to say in the Zion Mitzvos, the 7 laws that are given to the non-Jews, Hari Shalosh. So now this is 3 commandments in this fourth category over here. So not to disrespect God, to honor the Torah, and to study Torah, to work in it. Chamishis, this 5th category, 23 here, Gezel, theft. 24, Shalala Sik Torah, Shahid Rosh Salina, not to study Torah, that is the inheritance specifically of the Jewish people. Kamavur Shama B'Sanhedrin, Harishtaim, that's 2. So there's parts of the Torah that apply to the non-Jews, there's parts of the Torah that don't apply to the non-Jews, that are the responsibility of the Jewish people, the special inheritance for the Jewish people, like things like the laws of keeping Shabbos and building the temple and the sacrifices and so forth, which those themselves are on behalf of the rest of the world, but they're a special responsibility of the Jews. Shishis, 6th general category, 25, Hadinim, the Yeshuva Sha'ilim, the laws, justice for the establishment, the civilization of the world, and 26, and it should not become destroyed. To fail, there's a commandment in Genesis on here, it's Genesis, if you look it up, chapter 8, verse 22. We cannot let civilization just go to waste and to be destroyed. So that is in the 6th category. The Shvi is the 7th category. 27, Ever min achai nitfela saleya, eating the limb of a living animal and everything that's connected to that. 28, dam min achai, the blood of a living animal. And then he writes in parentheses, because it says, look in the tractate, we have to understand that he's bringing the question to our attention. Well, in the tractate in the Talmud in Sanhedrin, it says, we don't say that's one of the 7 mitzvahs. Okay, we're going to see. It's not one of the 7 commandments that has culpable with capital punishment, but it's part of something that's forbidden to a non-Jew. This here is a typographical error. It says 59, it should say 29. Nevela, the dead animals. 30, basar min mace, flesh from a dead person. Hi arba, that's 4. I believe it's referring here to a dead person because it says in the Gemara that we studied before, but from tractate Chulin, that it was saying, it was referring to dead people. Mispar Kulam Shalishin, this is 30. The Ayin b'Minchas Chinuch. See in another book called Minchas Chinuch on the mitzvah, the commandment 154 of the Sefer Yad Eliyahu. Siman Memhei Shinistapku im Ever Minachai B'Basa Minachai Shal Adam Aser L'Baneach. They're having a discussion whether or not the limb of Ever Minachai and Basa Minachai of a living of a person is forbidden to Ben Noach. Obviously, it's forbidden. The discussion is whether it's one of where does it fit into the crimes and what the punishment is. So you just bring over here. This requires more. We should look in another place. Okay, so we made it through here, and not that we're in a rush, but I just felt like I wanted to bring this point to conclusion. We have a whole lifetime, but I wanted to bring this this to conclusion because I wanted to just give us the picture of the full 30 that is brought down in the tractate Chulin, and what this should definitely open our eyes to and see clearly is while we're going to still be progressing into understanding the details, but we have to understand that the concept of seven is just a general category, but there's many, many more details. We already now up to 30. And that's a significant number. And I'll tell you why the number is significant. I'll just conclude on this concept over here. We know that there's 613 commandments in the Torah for the Jewish people. 613 commandments includes all the commandments related to the crops, the holiness of the crops in the land of Israel, agricultural commands for the land of Israel. There is commandments related to the sacrifices. There's commandments related to the building of the temple. All of these commandments actually applies in certain times, in certain places for certain people. Meaning to say the commandments of how to conduct oneself, the sacrifices in the temple, even when the temple is going to be rebuilt, I'm not a Kohen. I'm not one of the members of the tribe of the priests. So I'm not going to be, I have to learn it, but I'm not going to be practically implementing it. I'll be supporting it through helping build the temple, but not actually doing it. So the point is, when we actually take the number of commandments that apply to a Jew on a day-to-day basis in this time, and even after the building of the temple on a day-to-day basis, for the average Jew, it's actually much less than 613. So we're starting to see that we have 600. I have to look up the numbers. The Chofetz Chaim compiled how many it is. I have to see what it is. But we're now up to, we just want to say that it's not like it's 7 for the non-Jews and 613 for the Jews. On a practical basis, we're already up to 30 for the non-Jews, and we're substantially less than 613 on a practical everyday basis for the Jews. I'll try to have that number for next week for our discussion, to be able to see that it's the Torah that applies to the Ben Noach is very, very full. It's not a meager 7 commandments. Hey, just don't kill anybody and don't steal anything. And while you're at it, don't worship any idols. And kind of like that is a very, very, that's not what the Torah's intention is. It's a full life. It's a full life of connection to God. There's both negative points to stay away from, but we see already over here, in here, this is so critical to understand. The way that the 7 laws are often taught is just there's 7 things to stay away from. Okay, maybe the creating courts of law is a positive, but it's only, people teach it often kind of in a very limited way. It's only create the courts of law to enforce the negative. But we see already here that there's positive commands, being fruitful, being multiplying, honoring the Torah, learning Torah. These are all creating the dinim, creating justice. These are already things we see that there's positive commands. God has a purpose and has a mission for the Bnei Noach, for the non-Jews. That's an essential part of his vision for creation. Any questions or comments before we conclude?
All perfect.
Okay. Oh, Hashem. Thank God. Okay, we'll look forward to seeing you all next week.
Thank you.
God bless you all. Bye now.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.